up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The word of the Lord. Well, anyone that knows me well knows of my deep affection for the water in general, but especially the ocean. Pastor Melissa, if you could post the print that I sent to you. As I was quickly scrolling through Facebook the other day, this picture of water caught my eye. What was so eye-catching about this particular painting of the sea was the image of the water itself. The representation was unlike most paintings that we enjoy of the sea. It was troubled, upset, hyperactive, uneasy, even discomforted. So opposite from the much more tranquil and serene renderings of ocean waves gently lapping the shoreline in many of the paintings on the walls that hang in my home and office, and probably yours too. I recognize the artist's work from the collection of Claude Monet, a favorite of mine, but I couldn't remember the name. So scrolling through the devotion, right past the words, I looked for the credit, and there it was, Agitated Sea at Atreta. This painting immediately struck me as an illustration of our lives right now. The waves are rough. They're crashing all around us. Some of us may fear we're drowning. Well, at this point, I realized I owed the author at least a few minutes to read his or her devotion after pondering the visual illustration that had first captured my attention. The meditation proved to be written by Franciscan priest and author Father Richard Rohr. I know his name is very familiar to many of our pastors and deacons. In his homily, he speaks of a oneness in suffering. Again, we may see examples living out right before us now in our communities. In today's reading, centering is taking place with Jesus and his disciples as he leads them towards the transfiguration experience, and while he also prepares them for the cross. The disciples' first response to the transfigured Christ is fear. Again, is this not where many of us sit this day? And if not us, then perhaps our members, our family, our friends, as we all brace for the full impact of this virus. Rohr goes on to say, the disciples mirror the itinerary of the spiritual journey. We start out with many concerns, fears, worries. Our minds and our hearts are all over the place. But Jesus comes, he touches them and says, "Get up and do not be afraid." When the three disciples raise their eyes, they see nothing but one image, and that's Jesus. Their lives are fully focused and simplified on the one thing that is necessary. Sooner or later, we all have our own transfiguration, and we all have to walk down the mountaintop into the ordinary world. The one we see now is full of fear and suffering. As I began to end my time dwelling in this particular devotion, I looked up, only to ponder again the print that hangs above our mantelpiece in our living room. It's a painting of Jesus in a small boat with his disciples. Jesus standing with his arms outstretched, with the caption underneath the image reading, "And he arose and rebuked the wind and said unto these, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm." During this challenging time, let us all keep our eyes on Jesus. Let us pray. Almighty Father, in these uneasy days of Holy Lent, in hope, we are free to live in the present with trust that you will never leave us. May your Spirit calm the troubled waters that surround and threaten to engulf us. Help us to reflect the radiance and the confidence of one certain in your promises of help. And Lord, have mercy on us as we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Beth. I understand that we have at least one announcement type of presentation. I think Ellen Lundy, you were prepared to say a few words about the National Youth Gathering. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
I think I heard you, but only very faintly.
Okay, how about now?
A little better, yes.
All right, good morning, everyone. I am serving for the 2021 ELCA Youth Gathering as Synod Coordinator. So I'll be the Gathering Synod Coordinator for Southwestern Pennsylvania. So I just wanted to let everyone know that I'm serving in that role, and also to give you my contact information. There'll be probably now a virtual meeting coming up in April or May to get the preliminary information about the youth gathering and preparing for that. So I'll have that at a later date for you, but today I'll put my cell phone number and email into the chat. And as we need things to look forward to, I think the youth gathering is going to be one of those things we can be looking forward to with a lot of hope and excitement. I was in Minneapolis at the end of February for a first training, and there's some really great stuff going on. I think it'll be an exciting time for our youth. So you can connect me to your primary leader, or if that happens to be you, please come to me with any questions. Now that we're going to be at home for a little while, maybe it's time to start thinking about the youth gathering in 2021. So just wanted to say hello as your Gathering Synod Coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. And I believe that our Synod Day Coordinator is also on this video conference. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. Hi. I don't know much except that we're meeting in November. But yeah, I'll be planning the Synod Day, and we're doing that jointly with Northwest Synod as well, like we've done in the past.
Very good. Thank you both very much. Are there any other announcements, staff, that I have missed before we're ready to tip into the main topic of this morning, which is our Synod Assembly? I know that my memory is often frayed at about this point. All right, let's tip into Synod Assembly. There is a letter that our presiding bishop wrote to us, to all the synods, that I'd like to read a portion of, because I think it is important for us to hear her words of encouragement to us all. So I'm going to see if I can do that and not lose the call. She writes, "Dear colleagues in ministry, the office of the presiding bishop and the office of the secretary have been diligently evaluating and conferring, both internally at the churchwide organization and with a number of bishops and others, as well as with several consultants, regarding responsible next steps in addressing the unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Protecting the health of congregation members and the public and mitigating the spread of the virus are principal considerations. In all our deliberations, we remain grounded in being church together for the sake of the world. After prayerful reflection, we make the following recommendations to synods in light of the current healthcare emergency." And there are 4 bullet points at this point in the letter. The first is this: postpone scheduled synod assemblies until the fall. And then in parentheses, if an annual synod assembly is not required by synod governing documents or by state law, and if there are not urgent issues such as elections, consider deferring the next synod assembly until 2021. So the first of the 4 bullet points is, we recommend that you postpone or even defer if you don't need constitutionally to have a meeting. The second bullet point in synods in which there are bishop elections, so I think we can just leave that for now because that's not true for our synod. And then the third is to consult with your synod attorney to ensure that provisions of governing documents and state law are met regarding rescheduling a regular meeting of the Synod Assembly. And then finally, to confer with the presiding bishop's office for coordinating, scheduling, and evaluating agenda issues. I wanted to bring that to your attention and to actually read her words to let you know that I brought these words to our executive committee last Thursday, and the executive committee acted to recommend to the Synod Council that we postpone our Synod Assembly until the fall. The Synod Council will not meet until Saturday, and so even though this conversation will have as a significant portion of its content what that would look like if we postpone to the fall and the implications of that for us. We can't yet speak with the certainty because the Synod Council hasn't met and won't until Saturday. So I think it's important to say right from the very beginning, and maybe to say a couple of times along the way, what we are talking about at this point is still contingency, still a recommendation, and not an action that the Synod Council has made. Let me say what I think are a couple of the most significant consequences or implications of doing this if on Saturday the Synod Council says, yes, we will decide to do this. To me, the single most important implication is that our Synod a couple of years ago invited Pastor Beth Platts to come and be our keynote speaker for our Synod Assembly this year, as this year is the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women in our church, and as Pastor Platts was the first woman to be ordained in our church, and as she is a daughter of this synod. Redeemer Carrick is her home congregation. So we acted quickly enough to have her commit to our Synod Assembly 2 years ago, or a year and a half at least. But even then, we ended up with a miscommunication about dates. And because of that, we ended up having to plan for our Synod Assembly at IUP instead of CalU, simply because the dates that I had worked out with her were not the same dates that our assembly planning group was working with, which leads me to believe then that if at this late date, here it is March, and we'd be looking at the fall, if we would want to have Pastor Platts be our keynote speaker for our assembly, just the logistics of that may be challenging enough that I could imagine separating the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women celebration in our synod with her presence from the rest of our Synod Assembly if we are not able to make the logistics match quickly enough. So to me, that's one of the most significant potential implications of this, and I want to put that out there for our conversation. Another implication is, and again, this just has to do with scheduling and accommodations. We have been in negotiation with Indiana University of Pennsylvania for some time and have brought those negotiations to a place where we thought that we would have an assembly there Friday through Sunday. If now we need to come to them and say, we're going to reschedule, and I think it's worth bearing in mind, it's also possible that the university itself might not be willing or able to host us even if we decide not to reschedule. I think that's also important to remember. So it could be that we could look at the fall and say, they might say, no, we're not able to do that, or our own timing might not work easily with IUP. So another implication is that we need to have very rapid and intensive conversations with IUP as we think about the actual details of when and what our assembly will look like. From that, then, a lot of other things cascade as far as implications. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds quite yet with those things as they reach farther and farther from our reality. But here's one that is, I think, worth our conversation. Our bylaws require, they include a shall rubric, require that our secretary distribute the bulletin of reports at least 15 days before the first day of Synod Assembly. You know how when we gather in June, the bulletin of reports from the previous year already seems somewhat outdated. If we are imagining gathering in fall now and receiving at our assembly a bulletin of reports from the previous year and even farther distance, my question would be, what would you find useful to have in that bulletin of reports, which is constitutionally mandated, apart from those things that are posted on the website? Let me read a couple of constitutional provisions for you so that you have in your head already the framework within which we are working in case those are questions that you would have. The first is that our Constitution, S711, says that the Synod shall meet at least triennially, but then at our bylaw 101.11 again is a directive rubric, our synod shall meet annually. So relative to the bishop's letter, we are one of those synods that has in our bylaws shall rubric that we are meeting annually. So I think that's important for us to know as we go into our conversations. I think the most important bylaw is 101.11, and I'll read the whole thing to you just so you can hear where we are with that. The Synod Assembly shall meet on a regular basis annually with the date and place to be set by the bishop in consultation with the Synod Council. Notice of the time and place shall be given 60 days prior to the first day of the Synod Assembly, and shall be sent to all congregations, ordained ministers, and persons on the lay rosters, in parentheses, associates in ministry, deaconesses, and diaconal ministers of the Synod. That language is already out of date, and I think that we have revised that subsequent to the bulletin of reports that I have in my hand. But the salient points there are, it requires consultation of our Synod Council to do this, and a 60-day notice. What I will be asking our Synod attorney is if we remain outside the 60 days of the notice we have already given of our Synod Assembly, and that puts us at about April 11, I believe, may we reschedule and remain within the parameters of the Constitution, or having given notice once, must we do something extraordinary to change the time and place of the assembly? So that is something I have not yet done. I'm waiting till our Synod Council meets to see if that is the direction we're going, but I think we have until April to do that. I'm going to stop for a minute and ask if you have questions of clarity at this point. I've not been monitoring the chat. If there's been something important that has come by and a staff member has seen it, if you would please bring it to my attention, that would be helpful.
Bishop, Sherry Hazuda asked if we can go to a college in the fall, or if it's possible to have Synod Assembly on a college campus, given that classes will be in session.
Good question, right. And this is, of course, one of the things that comes immediately to mind when we go to college campuses. would the fall be available. I might invite Pastor Bob Schaefer in a moment to speak to what he knows about IUP, but I believe that it may be the case that their convention center would be available to us, even if there are students in residence on campus. Pastor Schaefer, would you be willing to address what you know about that?
Yes, that's correct. I've been in touch with Kathy, who is the coordinator of the event center at IUP, and it did not sound like it would be trouble for us to meet there during the school year. And in fact, she even mentioned that there are a smaller number of dorm buildings that are available, but there should be dorm accommodations if we needed to have those during the school year also. It's also worth noting that the reason that we are at IUP this year is because of the confusion with the schedule. Our dates that we had booked with Cal U were not available. But you know, if it turns out that when we are needing to reschedule in the fall, IUP isn't available, we can certainly also talk with Cal U. So we have a number of options, I think.
Pastor, have we signed an agreement with IUP yet?
I do not believe that that we have signed a formal agreement. I think that Kathy was working on finalizing that document with the agreement for us.
That was my understanding as well. So I think what that means in my mind is that the opportunities for imagination are greater than a very strict boundary based on an agreement for which we've already paid some money.
Yes, and of course, all of the events at the Kowalczyk Center are shut down right now, and they are working to reschedule everything. So you know, Kathy is very aware of the need to be working with groups and trying to find ways to get them all in a time when it's going to be safe to do that.
Pastor, it looks like most of us are sitting at our dining room tables, except you are in your professional recording studio.
It's my cave. So I made a PVC pipe frame in a closet in my bedroom, and then I draped moving blankets that you might get from a U-Haul over it, and put some LED lights up there that you know, I can have fun.
It is a marvel. It is a marvel. Thank you. And thank you for your responses that help us shape the territory that we are actually in.
Yes.
Bishop, the next question was about the submission of reports from agencies. Since those reports are a bit outdated now, Deb was wondering if Lutherland and other agencies could submit later.
Thank you for that question. Our reports were all due March 15th. And as we were coming close to that date, it occurred to me that this year I might have a valid excuse to be late in presenting my report because of this issue exactly. I think there is great value in the voting members of our assembly having the opportunity, whether they take that opportunity or not, having the opportunity to read about the ministry of all of our partners. That's a significant part of our life together, and we don't want to miss that. Having said that, it is also the case that very often, by the time we read the report in the Bulletin of Assembly, the year before that it reflects on has gone by for some distance. It would seem to me that if the path that we choose includes a bulletin of reports that, based on its name, includes, among other things, the reports of our ministry partners, it would make most sense to have those reports due closer to the new date rather than to have them submitted by the end of this month and really be out of date by the time we read them. So if I may be so bold as to say to our ministry partners who are listening, and anyone else who has a responsibility of submitting a report to the Bulletin of Reports, if you've already done so, God bless you. You may need to do it again because our world has changed from the day that you gave that. If you have not already done so, hold tight until you hear again specifically a due date for your report, because my guess is we will be better served if that comes closer to the time that we actually meet. Thanks, Peter. Are there others that I've missed?
Bishop Amy Santarello has asked a question: if we do the celebration stuff at a different point and just need to do a business meeting, could we do that on a Saturday and not need to worry about housing?
Yeah, I can actually imagine that. I've been pondering that in my head. And again, with the very clear notice, disclaimer, that everything we are talking about is still contingent because the Synod Council is not acted, nor do we have a date in mind. But I could imagine a full-on Synod celebration of the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women in our church, with Pastor Beth Platts present at a time and place other than our Synod Assembly this year. And I could imagine the business portion of our Synod Assembly, which we had scheduled largely on Saturday, taking place on Saturday, making it possible for many of our voting members not to require overnight accommodations. Yes, I could imagine that. Are there other questions I've missed along the way, or do we open to other comments? Thank you for these excellent questions and observations. Let's open up to those who have questions of clarity or are wondering about the future, or maybe a helpful idea. In particular, I would be glad to hear your hopes of what our celebration of the 50th anniversary would look like if it ends up being separated from our Synod Assembly, and your hopes for what you would find useful in the bulletin of reports, knowing that we're moving from paper to electronic media as well.
Can I make a comment or a question about bulletin of reports?
Yes, please.
I'm wondering if, if we don't print an actual book till closer to the fall, closer to when assembly may be, are there particular pieces of the book that people would find helpful to have posted to our website? I mean, even maybe, I got a lot of agency and institution reports already. Would those who submitted them find it not helpful to have what they've written posted and then an update later as we get closer to assembly? Or would that not be a necessary thing? Also, are there particular parts of the bulletin of reports that people would want to have, maybe like the congregations list? Of course, the roster list I update periodically, but are there any other pieces maybe that, the updated constitution, for instance, and so forth? And I'll wait for comments.
I can speak just in terms of our report, and if there are other people who submitted reports on here that want to speak up, but I'm somewhat indifferent. The stuff that I wrote is still accurate for last year. And because of that due date of March 15th or 16th or whatever, my last paragraph was like, as of this writing, who knows? And so the information is still accurate because it's from the prior year. If people want to read it, that's totally fine. But I also feel like, if we're wanting it at the time of the assembly to reflect where we are at the time of the assembly, that's totally out the window. So I can just say it, and I see it, like Rick is on here and some other agencies. I'm somewhat indifferent.
Bishop, we received a question. Given that a lot of our agencies do their reorganization in the fall based on elections at Synod Assembly in June, do we have any idea what the impact of delaying assembly would be on those organizations' boards of directors?
Excellent, thank you. I believe that our secretary, Pastor Schaefer, may be more able more quickly to identify those elections that we were planning to have this year that affect our ministry partners, so that answer can be given with actual content and not just theory. Pastor Schaefer, is that correct?
To my knowledge, there were 4 sets of elections happening. There was elections to Lutheran Senior Life Board, Glade Run Board, and Lutheran Service Society. And then there was a fill-in election for a Synod Council seat in Conference 2 layperson. Those were the only 4 sets of nominations. I think there was 2 for Lutheran Senior Life and 2 for Lutheran Service Society and 2 for Glade Run, if I'm remembering properly. I don't have my right computer. Naturally, I picked up the wrong computer. But nonetheless, so I mean, it's not a massive amount of elections, and I'm not sure how that works with those groups. I don't know if Chris Hogue is on, that she could speak to Glade Run or any of the others for that matter. But that's my recollection of the elections that are up this year.
Thank you, Pastor. That's very helpful. Now we're talking content rather than theory. Do we have anyone from Lutheran Senior Life Board, Glade Run, Lutheran Service Society that might speak to your awareness of the internal expectation of that ministry partner so that we could understand how best to answer the question?
This is Tara Lynn. The Lutheran Senior Life Board actually meets this evening. And Chris Hoke is not on the call because she's in a management meeting at Glade Run.
Okay. Pastor Lynn, is that something that you would be willing to bring to the board for their deliberation? What I could imagine, and I think that these days we find that our ministry partners recommend names for the board of folks that they have been thinking about and have been raising up to serve, more than waiting to see what the Synod Assembly identifies. And it could be that their board could appoint for affirmation by the Assembly later on. But I'd want to check and see if that seems appropriate. We could work in partnership with our boards in that respect, I believe.
I think we can bring the topic to the meeting tonight and just let them know that our ministerium and Synod are talking about this.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the chat that I've missed?
So Amy Sanarello asked if it would be possible to have elections by mail the way Thrivent does.
I'm going to check with my secretary, but I believe that our Constitution allows for electronic meetings of the Synod Council, but I don't think that it would allow for proxy or absentee balloting. And I think that a mail, a US Post kind of mail election would be unconstitutional. Pastor Schaefer, do you want to comment on that as well from your understanding?
I was just kind of looking through the Constitution, and I would agree with that assessment. And because we would not know who is actually doing the voting in that way. So I'm going to say no. It says S7.31 says proxy and absentee voting shall not be permitted in the transaction of any business. So I would say no to that.
Yeah, that's also my understanding. Thank you.
Bishop, there's a chat from Pastor Erin Evans that says she's a nominations chair. They have names for Lutheran Senior Life, but none for Glade Run. Or she says Lutheran Social Services. She probably means Lutheran Service Society. Yeah, so just Lutheran Senior Life names.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate having that detail as well. The question, I think, is if we would postpone, do we inadvertently and negatively affect the work of our ministry partners? And it seems like if so, that is a small enough group, we can work individually with them to overcome that, rather than to fear a really widespread consequence. Our Synod Council is charged with working on behalf of our Synod Assembly in between meetings. And I could imagine that our Synod Council could do a lot of this work on a contingent basis, at least until affirmation by the whole assembly, if it comes to that.
Jocelyn asks, is it possible for those boards to change the way they do elections and have the boards elect new members themselves and receive affirmation from Synod Council?
Yes, good question. Thank you. And that question reflects, I think, a significant change in our life together in the partnership that we have between Synod and our ministry partners. One by one, our partners have been moving to boards that are more, I guess I'd use the word contemporary, boards that have members who are able to provide significant financial contributions to the organization, boards that look for very specific expertise in matters of law or governance or program knowledge. And because of that, boards these days will often have a board development committee that looks years in advance to identify what is the skill set that we need, or what's the contribution that we need coming up, and how can we position people well to function in that way on our board. That kind of work is not served very well by an assembly that has the opportunity to nominate from the floor and perhaps inadvertently to elect someone whose skill set or contributions don't match what the board needs. So we've been moving into the relationship where ministry partner boards will actually very often put forward names of those that they have been identifying in advance. And those then become the nominations to the Synod Assembly, either to take action on, or in some cases, this is true for the seminary now, it just goes to the Synod Council and doesn't come for action by the Synod Assembly anymore. So if the question is, can we have the boards change their policy or their practice so that our work is to affirm their work rather than to identify board members, I would say we're already on that path. And this year's assembly may be another step in moving farther down that path, which it seems has the capacity to serve our boards well, at least as well, if not better, from just sourcing nominations from assembly. Thanks for that question.
Bishop,
yes, please.
It may be that some of those boards need to change their bylaws, and that might take longer than they need.
Well, yes,
to fill these vacancies. So that's a consideration for those boards, but that may be an issue for them, that they definitely wouldn't be able to fill those vacancies that they need to fill right now.
Good, thank you.
Bishop, I just would like to contribute a little bit here. One of the changes that resulted from reducing from 2 assistants to the bishop to 1 assistant to the bishop was that the bishop's office no longer has a representative present typically at the social ministry organization board meetings, whether that be the camps or the social ministry organizations like Glade Run and Lutheran Senior Life. So at the same time that we're changing, we're talking about these types of changes, we want to recognize that as a synod, we're actually more dependent on our synod representatives on the board to relay information between the boards and the synod than we have been in the past. And so the responsibilities of board members to serve as representatives of the synod is actually increased at this point as a result of our staffing changes in the last 9 months.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that very much. While you were speaking, I glanced to the chat and saw a question about a virtual Synod Assembly. I know that Rocky Mountain Synod, because of their large geography, has a practice of this already, in that their Synod Assembly meets in 5 locations. In that synod, 1 conference is Utah, 1 conference is Colorado, one conference is Wyoming. And so the territory has made that part of their practice already. For us, I don't believe that would be constitutional at this point.
Perhaps we may wish to entertain a change to our governing documents to allow for that in the future.
Yes, thank you. We don't know what our future will be, but it certainly seems that we are depending heavily on virtual meetings these days. There's no question about that. Good.
So,
Other questions or chats that I've missed about the implications of postponing our Synod Assembly? Any further responses to Sandy about what you would like to see in the Bulletin of Reports, what you find helpful in the print copy? We're putting more and more online, of course, and that may be another piece of our Constitution that needs to be updated along the way. But any further response to her about that? Coming into this meeting, it seemed like this this part of our intended spring conference luncheon, the conversation was going to be about how will we manage a Friday through Sunday assembly with our request that our pastors, who are voting members, be at assembly instead of their congregation. The anxiety around that question seems to have been completely overwhelmed by the present situation in which all of our congregations are experiencing a much greater crisis than we could even have imagined our assembly might elicit. So I think that the conversation that we're having now ends up being a much smaller conversation, less anxious, a few practical details, and all contingent as they're waiting on the Synod Council to make its action on Saturday. So I think that we may actually be coming to the end of the content part of this gathering and move into the check-in part of this gathering. Before doing that, I just want to offer one more call, last opportunity for questions of clarity about our Synod Assembly perhaps being postponed, any other implications that you see, or any other feedback you'd like to give as we try to create the best response in the situation that we have.
Schmidt just put a comment in the chat. I'm wondering if she wants to speak to that.
Good. Yes, please, Pastor Schmidt.
I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but I'm just wondering if we might consider shifting the women's celebration to 2021. National Church celebrated it a year early. We could celebrate it a year late. Part of the reason for having it as at assembly is education, is for folks who may not have been exposed to clergy women or not realize that this is a big deal. We'll be part of the celebration just by being there. And I wonder if we would get those people to come out for a celebration that was just for the clergy women.
Thank you, Pastor. And I am also mindful, I don't want to be untoward, but I'm also mindful of Pastor Platz's very candid and immediate response to me when about 2 years ago I invited her to come and speak at our assembly, and her response was, if I'm still alive. And I think that that's both humorous, but also has a note of reality tucked into it.
So we might want to get her recorded as a backup.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for that deep consideration of one of the primary goals of the celebration is to draw into that folks who may not already be part of that as an education and invitation. Pastor Schmidt, you are part of a group that is working already on planning that celebration. May I ask you to bring that to the group to gather their wisdom and to invite them to weigh on our behalf what seems like the best way to accomplish the goals, and to trust that the theory of subsidiarity, where those closest to the question are best positioned to answer the question well. Thank you, Pastor. There was someone else who was going to.
Could add something as well.
Yes, please, Margaret.
Some of the women clergy gathered recently, and we pondered the possibility of leading some workshops. So I don't know if that would be something that would get lost, or if there would be still an opportunity for that in some way.
Thank you, Pastor. And the question, as I heard it, was looking at this assembly in June, we had a number of workshops planned, special educational gatherings Friday night, and again, Saturday morning. Might we be in danger of losing that great value as we move forward? I'll make sure that I record that as a value we want to tend to. Thank you, Pastor.
Bishop Cusero, may I jump in here?
Yes, you may.
So kind of two separate thoughts. First thought in regard to the Synod Assembly. If it doesn't work out that it can be held at a college campus, would it be possible to hold it at the convention center in downtown Pittsburgh, much like when presiding Bishop Elizabeth Eaton, when she was elected as presiding bishop? What was that, 2014?
13, yes. Thank you, yes. And our habit, our history has been to have an assembly with 2 overnights, and in the summer, in the June. And so we have found that college campuses tend to be inexpensive, with the downside of having our people stay in dorms. But as we are changing our patterns, our shape, we can open up the possibility of location as well. Absolutely, yes. Other synods do all kinds of things, including assembly on a cruise ship. Last call for comments about assembly before we move into the check-in portion. Yes, please.
On that it would be a great idea, except I looked into the convention centers 2 years ago, and they're cost prohibitive for us to do that.
Thank you, Deacon. I appreciate that. Very good. Pastor Stoller, can we move out of recording into our mutual conversation